Okay, everyone, this is our second talking circle of the year. We are discussing colorism and featurism in Indigenous communities. The purpose of the American Indian Traditional Healing Center holding our talking circles is to provide a safe space for conversation as an avenue for healing with the spirit of love and truth. So we are addressing a very prevalent issue that happens in various Indigenous communities across the Americas, honestly, completely, not just North America. And so we're going to go ahead and get started here. We have an amazing guest with us by the name of Soul Divine. Soul Divine, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I just took myself off the mic. Hi, my name is Soul Divine. I do apologize that my voice is a little raspy. I am under the weather, but I'm Soul. I am a mix of a content creator. I am a community leader within the Black wellness community. Now, keep in mind, I know we're not Black. I do like to give a warning or a heads up. I use Black as a signal for content purposes. But within my spaces, I prefer using indigenous names and so forth. With that being said, excuse me. With that being said, I am a mix of a content creator, community leader, and also a promoter for Black wellness businesses within our spaces.
All right. Do you share your Indigenous lineage so that everyone out there can know which Indigenous community you're tied to?
Yes, ma'am. So my people are Geechee and West Indian. So my grandfather is specifically from Tortola. So those are my main roots.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to start with the definitions and so that everyone can know what exactly is colorism and featurism. So, colorism is a term coined by author and activist Alice Walker, in which she describes it as the prejudicial or preferential treatment of same race people based solely on their color. It specifically refers to interracial discrimination, in which those with lighter skin tones are favored over those with darker skin tones. And this usually goes hand in hand with featurism. And when we talk about featurism, that is a form of discrimination where a person is judged, marginalized, or privileged based on their facial features, such as their nose shape, lip size, eye color, and hair texture. Systemically, those with features aligned with Eurocentric beauty standards experience less discrimination and bias compared to those with features associated with various racial or indigenous groups. In discussing the impact of colorism and featurism, how would you say that colorism and featurism has personally impacted you? So Divine.
Gotcha. Sorry, my trying and turning on and off has been an issue. With colorism and featurism, how that impacted me, it impacted my confidence. Um, I've always been a dark skin. I've been called darky. I've been called um, literally African booty scratcher. I've been associated with other nationalities or other ethnic groups that are native to Africa. But there hasn't been thought about my people actually being indigenous here, me having my culture originating from here, from between here and the Caribbean. And so I'm reduced to societal ignorance with their perceived perception of dark skin, coily hair, African. But my features are all over. We're not just in Africa. So it's been uh, it's been eye opening, but it also has been a long journey for me because I had to talk to my elders about these things, and a lot of times these are things that they hide. The true names, as far as being Geechees
Mhm.
and even Gullas, they hide those terminologies with us. So that it impacted my ignorance and further the ignorance in me. And I'm 26, so I'm still learning a lot as I go along. Especially is why I'm at a family reunion to get to the bottom of things.
And so when you say that they hide, do you mean they don't talk about you being Geechee or Gullah or
Yeah, so they do hide about Geechee, their Geechee heritage. Um, it's about like seven of my aunts and uncles, but at least one of them were saying that it was being called a Geechee was like being called the N-word at the time.
Mm,
Um, that my grandmother told me stories of having rocks thrown at her, being called Geechee, as the other kids threw rocks at her as a child. And so and by the way, the story came up because I started reading more about African American online. And I saw that the Geechee term, and I didn't know what that word was. And as I read the definition of Geechee and the history, I started tying them. Like my grandmother used to tell me these things, my aunt used to tell me these things. So I had to, in a way, confront my grandmother about it originally. She was the first person I spoke about this to, and she basically gave me the story of how her generation kind of shunned it, and
mm,
my father generation moving down, which I'm the grandchild, it kind of erased the name and more so kept the culture hidden under the African American name
mm.
or African American um, national ethnicity.
Wow.
So it's a lot. As far as when my grandmother shared it with me, she was emotional. I was emotional. Uh, I was wondering why people when I went back to where we are now, my great
Hmm.
grandparents' house, I've always known that we were a little bit different than
Hmm.
a quote unquote African American culture. So there were things that I connected her on, but unfortunately she did pass away a year later.
Hmm.
So I had to rethink and go back in my own memories and like, dang, everything that I thought was African American is
Hmm.
really unique to our family. I wasn't wrong with that intuition.
Right.
So with your first question, it's rooted in ignorance. I was ignorant to it. My dad is ignorant to it. My grandmother didn't teach my dad because of how society treated her.
Mm.
So my dad still don't really know what Geechee is. I try to teach him about it, but it's not really his thing.
Hmm.
Um, but it is something that the ignorance is something that's passed down. And then when it's passed down like that, and you have outsiders telling you who you are, you eventually start to embody that person or embody that nationality, even though that's not you.
Right. Right. And I think that resonates with so many of us um, who have received similar treatment in our own communities, where it's like because of what our grandparents and great grandparents and so on and so forth experienced, they're really quiet about a lot of the history because it's associated so much with trauma. There's so much trauma associated with being Indigenous, and being harassed because of who you are, that it's like, well, we're just going to keep quiet, or we're really not going to talk about it that much. Can anyone else who's on the panel here, can y'all relate to what she's saying? I know I can, as far as the history and how it has impacted.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. Does anyone want to share how you have been impacted by colorism and featurism personally as well?
I like to go if no one goes.
Okay.
I'll give a okay, so I'll give a history. I'll start with my mom's side. My mom's side is West Indian. Um, and they come from parts like South America, Trinidad, British Virgin Islands, Tortola, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And what I noticed, like me being a lighter, like compared to a lot of my family members, I'm more lighter skinned than them, so they're darker. And I would hear people say stuff like, um, who them African booty. They used to call it African booty scratcher. Like, say we go to visit in the States, and it used to anger me a lot because the people that are saying it look just like you, and you feel like, hey, these are my brothers and sisters, and sometimes the hurt comes from within your own community. Like you're ashamed of being this. If I say, hey, look, like we growing up, we learned from grandparents that we were out whack and stuff like that, and school system taught us different. So anyone who is indoctrinated, they say you're ashamed of being black, and they, call your name. You get into fights, stuff like that. They call you names like Gasso. it's different stuff like that. And it's like at a point you do kind of feel like, hey, let me don't speak out as loud. Especially when I was a kid, I didn't speak out as loud because if you say you something that someone doesn't agree with, then next you know you're in the schoolyard getting a fight because you're being indoctrinated. But I did experience colorism with my relatives. Like my father's dark skin, my mom is dark skin, and from a standpoint of that, I've seen where someone said, "How is that your brother?" Um, and I've noticed this a lot in the Spanish community. They are very big. Like growing up, not too far from Puerto Rico, we would have like we had a mixture of different people, but we would have the dark skinned Puerto Ricans, dark skinned Dominicans, and they would tell us, like how they're being treated in Puerto Rico, and they're being treated by these lighter skinned, whiter skinned people that were brought there to whiten up the islands, but the colorism did run deep. And this is something I experienced from a kid, teenager, and I'm still experiencing now. But it kind of angers me to know that my relatives that who are darker complexion are being targeted like, oh well, they're not indigenous. And someone did make a reference to say, well, you look more indigenous than your brother. And I'm trying to figure out how is that possible? Oh, well, because he's darker skinned. And I let the person know, you're lucky we're on the internet because you get a punch in the nose. But it kind of makes me feel bad to see my relatives, especially people being targeted for having dark skin as, okay, well, you dark skin, automatically that makes you African.
Yeah, it's a lot of ignorance stemmed from what is taught in school or what is not taught and what is also pushed in the media too. But Indigo, I see you have your hand raised, so
Yes, as I'm listening, I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with my cousin and also with other so-called Black women um, that are dark skinned. Um, and it's really sad to me. So I was having a conversation with my cousin about being Indigenous and our family history and all that. And she was like, well, I believe that you are Indigenous, but I couldn't possibly be Indigenous because I'm so dark and you're lighter than me, so that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense for me because I'm dark skinned. And that's something that I've heard a lot of when speaking with other people about indigeneity. um, they seem to think that maybe there's only like one or two phenotypes uh, where you can be indigenous and accepted as that. But because of the way that they look, their phenotype, they don't believe themselves that they are indigenous, and so they gravitate more towards this African identity. And that's something that I've seen happen a lot.
yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't know the history and don't know that what even settlers themselves recorded when they came over here to the Americas, that there were people of various shades of brown skin and various hair textures.
Hmm.
So that is definitely some education that needs to occur. Penny, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Uh, this is really very important, this conversation that's happening right here. And when I saw it on social media that this was going to be happening, I felt really, really good because more of these dialogues and fleshing this whole history out is imperative right now. With that said, I'm from Rhode Island, and Um, my people are the Chappaquiddick Wampanoag people. It's that little island next to Martha's Vineyard, or Nope, as we call it. And so I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, and the neighborhood where I grew up, there were Cape Verdeans, Narragansett, somebody from Maine, Passamaquoddy, and we were all of Afro-Indigenous lineage. And we all knew who we were connected to. And if you know anything about New England history, they the English really recorded every single thing. And during the census, in the early times of the, late 16, 17, 1800s, they really wanted to know who everybody was and where everybody was located. So with that said, a lot of us who knew, that we were Wampanoag or Narragansett or whatever, we knew how to trace based on all the stories that had gotten passed down. With all that being said, anybody who would look at any of us would question, oh, you're what?
Thank you so much for sharing that with me. It looks like Fabian, you had your hand raised.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is my audio good? Okay. Um, so I wanted to say that just to chime in. So if you go into my family history, family records, the average American, if they were to look at my mother compared to my dad, um, both of them are actually within the spectrum of what we consider dark skin. My mother is just a little darker with more prominent facial features. Um, and with that being said, the average American would look at her and they would think, oh, yeah, your mother is African, you know. But in fact, her side of the family is actually where most of my indigenous or Aboriginal heritage is. So, my mother, she is a spit image of my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. His side of the family is um, Wampanoag, Pequot Indian, and these were people who later settled the Great Dismal Swamp region in the DMV or Virginia and North Carolina. And that's mostly what I identify as. So if anyone asks me generally what my heritage is, I just say I'm maroon, Great Dismal Swamp maroon. My mother's lineage is heavily indigenous. There is some African there as well, but it's heavily of indigenous lineage. My father has indigenous lineage as well, but believe it or not, his side of the family is actually where most of the said African or so-called African is. Um, so the point that I'm more so making as well is I think that perception is everything. And I think that people will really just be amazed if they've never really studied it, that the way that people physically look, um, that is that is honestly instrumental to how their everyday life is. Because, when you leave your house and people see you, whether if it's in a workplace, school, grocery store, wherever, when people physically look at you, they perceive you a certain way. They perceive you whatever of how they perceive you, of how they have been either indoctrinated or taught. Um, so just to add a little more to the discussion. So yeah, I was a victim of colorism, of course, and featurism. Something that I do think that should be emphasized more is that featurism and colorism go hand in hand, but you have some people who are victims of one over the other or literally both. So, like when you go all over the world, let's say, prime example, if you were to go to India, people in India, a lot of them experience what we today call colorism. They don't necessarily experience featurism too much because they pretty much resemble a lot of the lighter skinned Indians amongst them, well, East Indians, let me specify. They resemble them, Um, they don't even really suffer from anything like texturism because hair types are all kind of, the same. I'm just making that comparison because, there's levels to oppression. So like if you're taking someone like myself and some of the people on the panel, we've been victims of not just colorism, but also featurism, also texturism. So, just imagine being condemned because of all three, you know. Um, and so that is like a very, very important thing. I can go much deeper into it. Part of the platform that I, am running on social media and everything, I talk about topics like this a lot. I think it's not only a discussion that has to be had, but it's also a discussion that everyone should everyone should at least try to gain like an understanding of it, because unfortunately sometimes discussions on colorism and featureism, it can also um, it can also cause some unnecessary division, even amongst relatives, relatives that may not have certain phenotypes that other relatives have and everything. But it's not a discussion that's designed or meant to divide anyone. It's just a discussion that's designed to have, along with everyone coming to a common ground so that social changes can, occur at least amongst our own people. And at the same time, it's like experiencing childhood. Childhood determines really what your adult life is even going to be like in the first place. So, you know, it goes really deep.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Fabian.
Mhm.
I can definitely relate to what you're saying as far as like people feeling that because you are of darker skin tone that what you're saying is not valid or what you're saying or experiencing is not true. And I have experienced that so much in the Taino communities on the mainland in particular, to where it's interesting because with many of the so-called Tainos on the mainland, I am viewed as the darker skinned person. But when it comes to um, communities like here in the Southeast, it's like I'm on the lighter end of the spectrum. So it's interesting kind of like dealing with different communities related to different parts of my heritage and seeing how it plays out to where, okay, I'm bringing up this issue of colorism, and instead of addressing the issue, they resort to playing victim, um, as if it's wrong to bring it up. Or they'll try to shun you and say, don't deal with this person because XYZ. And so I could definitely relate to what you're saying about people equating a lighter skin with truth and good, and a darker skin with lies and negativity. So it's very unfortunate, and it does have effects on you even to this day. Rebecca, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, you would think being in the South, as it's hard to think about because of where I come from. People look down on us because of some fact of our skin color, and they think we're African, and we're called the N word by certain groups of people in that community. It's hard to fathom. I'm sorry, it just made me think about some of the things growing up
Okay.
in the South, to know that how colorism and featureism is ingrained in the class system that they created to misidentify us as a whole. And I'm gonna stop at that because it's just too much right now.
Yeah, and that has happened. And that's what people really need to know too, that the paper genocide occurred along with the actual physical. So it's interesting because when people say, well, African features, well, Africa is a very diverse continent. Not everybody in Africa looks the same. Which part of Africa are you talking about? Furthermore, I grew up having some friends from there, and they knew we were not the same people. So it's really like this narrative that's pushed in America, especially in North America. I can't speak for anywhere else because this is where I grew up, but where it's like, oh, well, that's what you are if you have this certain feature and that certain feature. And it's like, what about the people in other places? What about the Eta in Asia? They're not African. They're indigenous to that part of Asia that they come from. What about the people who are called Melanesian? They're not African. They're indigenous to that part of the world, and they possess certain features. But if they were to come over here to North America, they would be labeled as being African because of the agenda and the narrative that has been pushed. And so I definitely love that you brought that up, Rebecca, is that there are indigenous people in and from various parts of the Americas that possess features that this narrative that has spread through this part of the world like wildfire has said is only exclusive to one continent, you know? So that is definitely something that needs to be laid out. Um, okay, Penny, I saw that you had your hand raised after Rebecca.
It really boils down to this. Colonization has, I guess, been the evil behind the door, you know, um, pitting one against the other, making everybody feel lesser than. And, when you look at it from that standpoint of what colonization has done, and still to this day, I mean, that's why we're having this conversation, dividing people up, humiliating people, enslaving people, light against dark. It's like this big soup of a ball of confusion. And here we are trying to untie the knots. But in essence, we are human beings. We are spiritual beings. And I guess in my 79 years, I look at it as at some point we have to rise above and get rid of the name calling that I used to hear. Monig was a word up in New England. Oh, you're a monig. You know what I'm saying. I mean, a red nigger, or all of the negative things, and then making people feel like they had to defend themselves. That they had to prove who they were. And at this stage in my life, I feel like this dialogue, as I said, and I keep repeating it, is so important. It's imperative that we talk about it, that we almost cleanse ourselves of all of the pain, from enslavement, from just being snatched away and from the continent, or snatched away from communities here, indigenous communities. I mean, it's just swirling around, in terms of the history. And so we feel it in our DNA, which is why we have to keep fleshing it out and getting to a point where we can feel, our strength. And I believe we are feeling our strength. We have to slough it off. We have to talk about it, but we also have to be mindful of the process of healing, which is what we are doing. This is a process of healing, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing. But once you come to that, you see it, colonization, stripping people of everything. And then, you've got people who feel, the colonizers feel like they're better, that they're in control. And all of this is being, chopped up right now. And the truth, the truth will set us free, to coin that phrase. And that's what we're doing. We're seeking the truth so we can heal. And the next generation hopefully will not have the same pain that we've been suffering through. So, the healing is the most important piece to this dialogue.
Thank you. Soul Divine, I see you had your hand raised after Penny, so I'm gonna give you the space.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go back to your original question, because I thought about it further as we're talking more about this. But one issue that I'm facing right now with this colorism and featurism is Geechees are just now getting into the spotlight. The terminology, the history, the culture. And well, I'm going against TikTokers and Instagrammers and what you call it, data centers like I forgot Ancestry, sites like Ancestry that are all pointing my people to Africa. So when I tell people that we have indigenous roots that's on the East Coast, and we're not this high, we don't have high percentage of African in my family. I'm sorry. Um, I keep getting debated about that. Like it's a narrative that have to keep fighting. Those with my features are primarily African, and who knows? Maybe there's other people on the East Coast in that region that do indeed have those high African percentage, whatever have you. They have the roots and everything. But my family does not. That is something that's different. Sorry, I'm out and open. That's my family lineage or family tree is different. So having to keep explaining that and having to correct people has been. Well, it sounds like I've been smoking. I'm so sorry, and I haven't. But it's been draining to me because I'm having to keep letting people know that I can't speak for other Geechees, but I can speak for the people in this area that I'm in for this family reunion. I can speak for the ones that are maybe like 10, 15 miles out of this area and this location. These people have been here. When you ask them how long have your family been here, they're going to say hundreds of years. And if you had opened this up earlier, we have a burial ground that is over 200 years old. We still have people from what the mid 1800s or early 1800s graves. It's wooden. Well, I think it's wooden. That's on our people's property, and so that's flipped because people are saying, well, that must be the people that came off the boat, but that's not the story that's being told to us. Now, while the interesting side is my grandmother never mentioned the Geechee side. I didn't mention that part. I have aunties that mention that we have Indian in our blood in our family on this side. They didn't give tribes, they didn't give the exact location, but they said this is what we know. And so I've been having this challenge of telling people Geechees at this moment, at least for me from what I'm seeing, are diverse right now. And I wouldn't put a definite our community is just 100% or primarily African. I can't stand seeing primarily African because we even have like a little bit of other Highlanders, little sprinkles in there from colonialism. So I just that there has impacted me mentally, especially when I try to tell another person, but then they tell me, "Oh, I thought you people were African." And it's just like I have to keep explaining myself over and over and over again. But I wanted to put that out there because Geechees and then the other tribe, Gullas, are being they're going viral. People are learning about them. People are asking me about them, and it has been challenging having to keep explaining to people that we're all not the same, and even some of them actually come from different tribes. I even found some Geechees that were actually Yamasi. Or I don't know if Yamasi. I don't know if I pronounced it right. Did I pronounce it right? Yamasi.
Yamasi.
Yamasi. Okay. I even found some of them were a part of those tribes or those in that area. So it's just that there it does lower confidence sometimes
Mhm.
having to go against corporations and
Yes.
mainstreamers.
Yes.
That is challenging for me.
That's the only thing about social media. It's like it can connect people, but also it's like the a lot of the lies get just really pushed out there and promoted. As long as you have a lot of likes, people are going to believe that it's the truth. Because I actually have seen sources that speak of the Geechee people saying that they are from here. So, yeah, this is interesting. It's very interesting how much the lies spread and stick, and how when you do reclaim your indigenous heritage, people want to say, "Oh, you're not this, you're not that," because you don't look like how a native is supposed to look,
Exactly.
based on media, really. So, Taino Fury, I see your hand was raised after Soul Divines. So I'll give you the floor.
Yeah. So the most important thing I have learned from both sides of my family, especially traveling, talking to like great grandparents, stuff like that, is that history is always told by the victor. And whenever they tell history, it's always their version that rewrites your story and then writes you out. Um, I I want to piggyback on what Soul Divine was saying, and from my research, as far as what they say, Geechee, because my great grandmother, my father's grandmother, who was well alive, she died in 2006. she always used to say, hey, we Geechee. And I'd be like, what's that? But I was a little boy at the time. And she would say, don't let no one tell you that we come from somewhere else. And I would say, well, that's where they say we all come from, as a kid. But my research, as far as the confusion to what the Geechee is, from what my research, Geechee and Gullah were of many different tribal people, but I've never seen research where, as far as the original Geechees and Gullah was always here. And even with the writing of De Soto and those people, they always describe them as these melanated, what they will call black folks. This is just a total description, so without a shadow of doubt, you can never mistake them for no one else. And when they started dismantling the history, they dismantled the identity.
Yeah.
And like I said, I like my great grandmother, she told us like, hey, we're not Africans. And me being indoctrinated, I used to try to argue, but she would bring out paperwork saying, hey, this, that, and that. And from my research, I've seen how the what they call the Geechee was connected to the Yamasee Confederation, how the Yamasee is connected to like the Stoner Rebellion. So it's like whenever our people went to war, they seek refuge with other neighboring tribes or other confederacies. And people's assumption that when someone is captured or enslaved, that automatically that makes them African. For my research, that is not the case at all.
It's not the case.
Enslavement is not only limited to African. It's limited to a prisoners of war. And with a prisoner of war, you could rewrite their history however you like. But I just wanted to touch on that because a lot of people don't know before 1785 or before United States Corporation, the 13 colonies started to form. From the south, north, west, every major city was an ancient civilization that existed. We were ancient civilizations that was here long before they started to form what they call United States. This is why every major city was already there. And what they did was they set fire to it. A lot of people don't know the White House was once a palace, and when the British was losing the war, they burnt it down. It was a palace. DC was already there. A lot of buildings are ancient, so we have to disconnect ourselves from this visible identity of us being like native. Because when people say Indian, the first thing they think is crossbows, teepees, little huts. They never think of anything older or better than that. And I think that's where a lot of people like limited mentally and thinking. And like I said, I've researched, and as far as the 1500s, the original Geechee, and of course they was called different names back then. There wasn't always Geechee, but they were always here. These are the people who built, like, had ancient buildings, mound builders, anything ancient, that was our people. But now they have disassociated us with just disassociate us with America being anything but ancient. They have created a narrative that, hey, you're hunter gatherers. They had a few of you here, and the ones that was here, a plague wiped you out, and then they had to repopulate the numbers, and they had to go to Africa and repopulate the Americas. And what a lot of people are realizing now, that was one of the biggest lies told. Even in Mexico, they'll tell you the original people in Mexico were always there. Now they want to admit the truth. They have erased the identity of all people, that it has created a mass division and confusion.
Right.
So now, the more whiter you are, the more native you are. And honestly, that is accurate, because native is only means to be born here. So we have to disassociate ourselves from dark skin means African and lighter skin is native, because the original people of the land, no matter where you were original dark skinned people. And every phenotype I find in artifacts always have a Negro phenotype.
Yeah.
Every last one.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I'm
continue.
glad that she's light on it. And I've lived in Massachusetts. I lived in Brockton. I learned about Wampanoag um tribes. I learned about Massasoit. I've learned about a lot of people from there. You know, the area, Rhode Island. My grandfather said we have Algonquin, and that's on my mom's side, the West Indian side. I was only able to trace it to Rhode Island, then had a dead boat, you know, a dead end.
Hmm.
But people from these tribes were shipped out to the West Indies. So yeah, that's something that we should also look into. But yeah, I'm gonna hold up no more of your time. I just
Yeah.
wanted to add that.
Thank you for sharing that because I know the Maikiwa people, a number of our people were captured, enslaved, and shipped to the Caribbean. So yeah, that definitely happened. And that, again, that's not talked about. People don't talk about how the first people enslaved in the Americas were indigenous people. And that didn't just stop just because they started bringing people from Africa here, you know. And it wasn't even just people from Africa that were enslaved and brought over. It was people from other parts of the world too. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of history pertaining to what happened in the Americas that's not taught. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Tino Fury. Rebecca, I see you have your hand raised, so I'll let you go next, and then we're going to go on to the next point.
Okay. A couple things. Far as ancestry, along with the information that my grandmother gave me, and knowing that I grew up around three great grandmothers, and one of them was the medicine woman within the community, Ancestry had a map mapping my family. My family didn't come from Africa. My family was moved within the southeastern parts of the United States into the northern parts. When the cities that we call cities today, they were called countries. The steamboat was used, that HR 1514 116th Congress, the Creek Treaty, Section 6A showed that steamboats were used to move our people from one part of this land to the next. The cities, like I stated, the cities that we think are cities now, they were called countries within the United States. We were an amalgamation of tribes living together. That's one thing I learned about the census records. The three times, four times great grandparents, they never fully give their name, but they gave where they originated from. Georgia being the main state where the majority of our people migrated from into these other parts of the cities that we call Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana. And for as the Geechee part of it, I know from my dad's side of the family, all from Louisiana. Genealogy is the key to understanding who we are, where we come from, and the healing part of this is learning who we are, who we were, and also healing from the atrocities of that Walter Plecker paper genocide created. And most people act like that paper genocide did not happen. We've been the most how can I put it?
Reclassified
Reclassified people on earth, from Indian to Black to Negro to mulatto,
color.
nobody else. And most of our families didn't speak of it because most of them were killed because we couldn't claim our Indian heritage. And the ones who didn't want to integrate and didn't want to speak the English language, they put them in asylums.
Hmm.
That's the history that I discovered amongst all of us as we walk this earth today. And
Yes.
the women who married the settlers, the chiefs, I'm gonna put it just like this: the women who were the chiefs who married the settlers, they were put in asylums in order for them to take the land.
Mm,
They used many tactics to take the land from our people and to put another set of people in our place.
yeah. They
and the
up,
indigenous cemeteries on the land, I truly feel like those should be historical markers because that's how we lived. We had our churches on the land. We had our cemeteries on the land.
yeah. And so they definitely use various tactics to take control,
Yes.
up to and including the children from those unions that were created. They were also used to unfortunately stand in the way of the progress of the indigenous people in particular. And thank you
Mhm.
so much for sharing that, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
So to our next point, how does colorism and featurism impact your community? I think we have gone we have gone into that. I will say in regards to particularly my so-called Taino side, what I have noticed as far as the impact that colorism and featurism has had in that community is them not really wanting to acknowledge people who are like my skin tone and darker. Um, and it's not on every island. Like I said, I've noticed that mainly is a lot of the people who are on the mainland, but are of that lineage and are from like certain islands. I'm not gonna name them, but they pretty much have that very prejudiced, anti-dark skin whatever type of features. But it's interesting because when you do go, like I have a relative who was in Puerto Rico recently. She was in Boriquen, and she was like speaking on how she was so surprised that she saw people of like our skin tones and darker, because our indigenous Caribbean lineage doesn't come from Puerto Rico. So she actually was like, "Oh my gosh, like I see people there who look like us and da 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 da." And you don't really see a lot of that in the mainland. You see certain types of people, and I have experienced the discrimination from those particular people. But it's interesting because when you're actually there, things are different. So, what I do know about people in the Taino community that are like of my skin tone and darker and shared some similar features is that they too are also being discriminated against. It's not just me, to where if an issue is brought up, then again, it's like, well, let's just not talk to this person. Let's just shun this person because this is going to look bad on us. This is going to look like we're not, you know, a certain type of way that we want to be portrayed. So as opposed to fixing the issue, it's like, let's just not deal with that person and let's sweep it under the rug. And it continues to persist to where it causes a lot of problems and a lot of hostility. So I don't know if does anyone else want to share how that has impacted your community in particular, your indigenous community in particular, or are y'all good on that point? Penny?
Yeah,
Thank
I couldn't find the hand up. Just real quick. Yeah, I mean, it happens. It happens, in my community. Um, we have a rainbow in the Chappaquiddick um, tribal community, right? From the very light to the very dark and everything in between. Now, some of the other communities throughout New England might look different than us. So, there's that kind of rumbling in the background of people perhaps making comments, looking at us as if we're very different. When in essence, we are all, connected. If you say you're Wampanoag, our sister tribes within the Wampanoag community, a lot of us are related to everybody else. But there are a few people who are going to look down on different people, like myself with locks. I've had locks for a long time, and I'm going to keep them. You know, um, I remember an elder that I was very close to from one of the sister tribes used to say, "What are you doing to your hair? Why are you wearing your hair like that? You're around those DC people." Because I moved to DC and live in Maryland now. But no, I mean, this is my natural, this is who I am. And this is, what I'm all about, wearing who I am, walking proudly. And, speaking my truth. So I don't know. A lot of people are not comfortable with that, and I look at my community, and I feel really great because it shows the different parts of who we are. That we don't need to be ashamed of it. We know who we are, and we're going to be comfortable with that, regardless of what people say. Um, and that's just a theme. That's the theme that I have. It's almost like a running theme, and it has a lot of different aspects to it because it does get back to history. It does get back to how people view themselves and see themselves in terms of perhaps how other people see us. Why it has to be that way. I think it goes back to colonization and insecurities and the colonizers feeling like this is what they needed to do to keep us all, you know, um, discombobulated in a lot of ways and not getting to our true self, honoring the earth and being a part of the earth and understanding our cultural ways, through language and through traditions that have been passed down and sometimes secretly passed down because of the way um, things happened. I mean, when you look at different tribal communities around Turtle Island, what happened? They were forbidden to use the drum, forbidden to speak the language, forbidden to, practice the natural ways of life, getting snatched from the land. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's all mixed into the conversations that we're having. I mean, everything, has a connection as to why we have to sort out where we are right now. Um, so there's a lot to unpack and there's a lot to put back in the proper places, so we can, live a meaningful life.
Thank you so much, Penny. That is definitely, definitely true. It's like the whole point of doing this colorism and featurism thing with Indigenous communities was to keep us separated and to keep us away from who we are. So I totally resonate with that. Tino Fury, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, yes. I just want to share my experience. Especially colorism within what they call the Taino community. The only reason I feel like we have this colorism issue because we have a lot of Europeanized people that I feel has invaded our lineage. And what I mean by that is if no one's really, if you're not familiar with the history of how they were bringing Europeans to whiten out the image of Brazil, the Caribbean, and different parts of Mexico. They already did it in the United States, and this was done intentionally. So a lot of these people are very much disconnected from the culture. They're not even in tune and tap with the history, the bloodline. And what you have is some people just putting on regalia and putting on this and that. And they have a colonial mindset that is anti-you, and what I mean anti-you, anti-us. Like it's in the blood. They do not like us to begin with. It's in the DNA. So when you see us online, we have to defend ourselves against these people. And at first, I used to be like this kind of kumbaya mentality. This was some years ago. But after experiencing and seeing the history of them, I understand why they act the way they act. The sad thing is that people are associating them as being more Taino, which honestly, if you technically, Taino is a new thing. If you want to go by the actual words, you go by the Garinago, Siboney, Lucaya, Sepoya, Calipunas, Calinagos, Guainis. Those are the actual names.
Right.
and
Those are the aspects
this,
of indigenous peoples who have always and originally occupied the Caribbean islands. The use of just to add a little bit of clarity, the use of the term Taino is a recent usage that is a very general term. It is not specific to indigenous tribes that originate from the Caribbean. It is a general term used, just like Creek is a general term used. And there were multiple tribes in the South that were put under the umbrella of Creek. So let me just clarify that. Okay.
I've been, and like I said, I'm connected to both sides of the family. My dad's side has um, Powhatan, Pamunkey. He has the Geechee, and it's just that I've noticed that whenever, and the only reason why we're going to the colorism thing is because so much mixed blood, especially those that have had an interest in erasing who we are just to take our place. So we wouldn't be going through that if they had not invaded in that manner. And and I want to touch on something Rebecca was saying. There is a movie about that where the men would intentionally marry the woman of the tribe with none but cruel intention, and then they would have them locked up in asylum so they get control of land and resources and stuff like that. And I let people know, and I just tell it straight like it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When you're bred with hateful blood, what you think the kids and the descendants are going to be? They're going to carry on that hateful genetic in them. Some might act on it, others might not. But even the talk of colorism, we're only going to this because we've been invaded for so long that so many people with cruel intent has invaded our tribe, and they think now that we owe them an explanation. When it should be the other way around. How can somebody who doesn't predate you think you are supposed to explain your features and your existence to them when
Yeah.
you predate them? And that's the biggest issue right there.
Yeah.
The colonizer gets to think they could take the originals, and now they want the originals to explain who they are. But when we was going through what we was going through, whether it was enslavement, um, invasion, and stuff, where were they?
Yeah.
If you ask anyone that think we're supposed to explain ourselves to them, ask them, okay, well, some of my family members pick cotton, and I let people know just because someone picked cotton doesn't automatically make them a slave. There's some people who was under contracts that was unfair, and because some of them were intentionally taught not to read or write, they might have a indenture contract that said 7 years, but then here goes 14 years pass by, and they can't read or write. So now they're realizing, hey, look, I've been picking this stuff for a very long time. Like, what year is it? Well, what's going on? And some of
Right.
them like, okay, well, I need to get out of this contract, and you're not letting me out. And hey, look, I got to get up out of here. So now they've got a poster for a runaway.
It originates from here. So it's just like that associating cotton with an enslaved African is just all ignorance. You know what I mean? It's just people are not educated. And that's why I was like, we talked about this on our board to have conversations like this so that it can open up a avenue for healing through education and through us sharing our stories. So thank you for bringing that up. Our next point is how does, and we may have already kind of talked about it. Some of the questions kind of interweave with this, but how does colorism and featurism impact your will to identify with your Indigenous American lineage? And I know Indigo talked about it a little bit earlier about how some people in our families who are of the darker skin tones don't um, want to or feel as comfortable identifying with their Indigenous lineage because of how much hatred is out there because they have darker skin, how much hatred that they receive for having darker skin. So I have noticed some of that too, where it's like the people who are of darker skin tones kind of shy away from it and don't feel as comfortable. as those of lighter skin tones with associating with their indigenous lineage. But is this anything that you all have experienced, and has it impacted, or did it used to impact your will to identify with your lineage?
Can I speak on that?
Yes.
Okay, so I can relate to that topic because I think in the day and age that we live in, especially like with social media or just media in general, a lot of times certain images are always used as representations for certain ethnic groups or certain ancestries. So, and believe it or not, this is just something that is a global phenomenon. You know what I mean? So personally, I think that, and where I'm going at with it is representation does matter. And so um, I personally think that various different images, not even just one, various different images should be used as representations of whatever ethnic group, whatever tribal nation, from the lightest to the very darkest, to the thinnest to the fullest lips, all of those things. Um, but it is, like I say, it is like a global phenomenon. There's been times, where I myself and others that I've known have had like forms of insecurities in the past, especially finding out like certain aspects of our lineages, not necessarily wanting to claim certain things, mainly because what's generally represented looks a certain way. And if you kind of don't see yourself in it, of what's being represented, you don't even really want to identify as it, and you sometimes may not even want to relate to it. Um, so, the colorism and the featurism aspect of that is like really important because, again, like I mentioned earlier, perception really is kind of what governs the world, unfortunately, at times. So it's like, someone were to ask you, oh, what's your ethnic background or whatever, and then you give them whatever whatever answer, and if they feel as though that you don't look like what you just said, you know, yeah, that can be, that could be like a stab in the back. So I think that I think that overall in this part of the discussion though, I think we could go into like maybe a direction of just perception, you know what I mean? And I land my plane on that.
Indigo?
Yes. I was going to say that, um, my mother had the mindset of go along to get along, meaning allow people to perceive you as Black. And she didn't really want to talk about who we really were. Um, and my father did. My father wanted me to know who I was. My father's Choctaw. And I remember my parents getting into an argument about that. And my mother said, well, in the eyes of the world, she's just another N word. Why tell her who she is? It doesn't matter. Um, and so growing up, that was what I did. I played go along to get along, because I knew that people were going to perceive me a certain way or perceive me as a certain thing. Even though I knew who I was, I didn't feel like explaining myself. I didn't feel that I should have to explain myself to anyone. And now when that happens, it just makes me double down, like even more. I'm not going to not stand in my truth and not claim who I am because of your ignorance and lack of understanding, you know? Um, and there are a lot of people, like I've gotten into it with people online, I've gotten into it with people in person, like a friend of mine who claims to be Choctaw, even though he's like white as the driven snow, an ex-friend. We were talking about it one time, and he goes to me, well, we were talking about our ancestors and ancestor veneration. He was like, well, why don't you venerate your African ancestors? And I was like, what African ancestors though? I don't have any. I don't like, and so it's frustrating, but now I think I'm more willing to explain the truth because I realize how ignorant people actually are. That's all.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I definitely can relate to what you said because, you know, I am who I am. I'm of the lineage that I'm of, but I'm not going to debate anybody on who I am. I am who I am. If you want to accept it, okay, cool. If you don't, okay, cool. Because, people have their own perspective based on a lot of times lack of education. So I identify as that. I will say that in I don't know how many years or generations, I'm probably the first person to publicly be like, I am Indigenous. The family knows, um, but don't talk about it, due to, again, the history, due to what has happened, especially here in, the Southeast. The extent of the erasure down here has been insane. Um, Debatably, some people may debate this, but I do feel like it has been extremely strong in the Southeast to where people think there's only five tribes, um, and only, five nations. So a lot of us don't look like how media says an Indigenous person looks. And I do feel like across many communities, that does impact. People would see, you know, if people saw my aunt and my dad stand side by side and ask them who's the Indigenous one, right? Or are they both Indigenous? They would point to my aunt because she's lighter skinned and she has features that are more accepted as being Indigenous features. And they wouldn't say that my dad is, but they both have the same parents. So it's the ignorance is very harmful to all of our communities, and it impacts us in different ways and to different levels. So I definitely understand what you said and to go about not wanting to debate and or rather not, sometimes doubling down on it. But if anyone, tries to say that I am something that I'm not, then I will educate them. But as far as going back and forth with people about who I am, I'm not about to do that. Like, yeah. Does anyone else want to share their experience in relation to this question, or can I move on? Tino Fury, did you want to say something? Okay.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay. So in ending colorism and featureism, do you work to combat those things? And if so, how?
Oh, can I speak on that real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, it's my life. Like I said, it's part of my platform. That is, I guess you could say that's just the beauty of social media. Everything has its pros and its cons. So us as a people, we come from a creative heritage. So even when we are in our worst states, we use the resources around us to, we utilize it to better the environment. And so that's just what I'm doing, among other people too. Other people are doing the same thing too, just to, gain awareness. So like I'll just add more to the discussion. So like recently there was a song that came out. If anybody knows about it, it was a rap song that came out called Spin That with a sister who, it's like a real vulgar, raunchy song, whatever. Um, I don't know if the song got a Grammy or what. I know she got like a standing ovation for the song. It's whatever. Everybody has various tastes in music. I'm not really criticizing the song, but I will say that um, I do have a problem though that there are a lot of children that are singing it. I don't think they should repeat the lyrics of that song by the rapper Young Miami. So our sister India Ari had spoke up or whatever, which she didn't totally criticize the artist or the song either. She just looked at much of the lyrics and the content of the song as low vibrational. So I'm using this as an example because India Ari is a really good example of a sister who, again, very richly melanated, prominent facial features, everything. She's always been known to be very natural. She even has a hit song from many years ago called Brown Skin, telling our people to embrace, their natural features. Um, she received a lot of backlash, especially on social media, you know, from her own people. Many people like made fun of her facial features, made fun of all of that, her whole. And the only thing that I just will say is, like I say, I speak out against colorism and featureism through social media and in certain circles that I'm in or whatever. I'm very unapologetic about it. Um, the main thing that I tell a lot of people is that when someone is discriminating, no matter who it is, or what color they are, what they look like, or where they're from, when they are discriminating against your facial features or saying whatever negative about the way that you look, they are mocking and basically putting up a middle finger towards your own damn DNA. That's what I tell people. That's basically like someone actually spitting on your ancestors' grave when they're discriminating against the way that you look. Because the way that you look is a reflection of your DNA. It's your ancestry. And that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely agree in that the way that we look, our facial features, that's our story. It's our bloodline. It's a part of us. And so the impact of just the psychology, and the mindsets that it has had, it definitely can it's something that makes people hate where they come from. But for instance, I have a friend who, like, okay, there's a Taino women's group that was put together, and she is indigenous from Haiti. And she was like, well, let me, I'm glad that I'm this light because she saw, the other people that were part of the women's group that someone had put together. And I did not put that group together, but my hopes was that by bringing other people in from different islands, not just Puerto Rico, not just mainland Puerto Ricans, my hope was that we can show as a unified front as being like coming from the first groups of people to be colonized, and that would be something that would show, hey, like we do all look different, and in that way, without stating it, to combat the colorism and featureism. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way, and people were unfortunately scarred. But this is why I was like, we have to have this discussion so that we can put that out there, so that this can send out the spirit of like just getting rid of all the mess and bringing us back to the roots of who we are. Because, like you said, if you have a problem with us, you have a problem with our DNA. You have a problem with who we are. Like we
Right.
are living history. We're not just the people of the past. We are still here. We are living history. And so, sorry, I felt called to say that. But Taino,
Yeah, no, I agree. I just want to say one little quick thing too. Like I said, I say this like just quickly, I'll say this is it's a time and a place to have fun and we as a people, we're known for having fun. We're known for all of those different things. Honestly, America was really built off of our ancestors establishing or making this place the place to come in for people to enjoy their lives, right? So it's a time and a place for certain things, but at the same time, more of our people definitely have to just be more mindful of how American culture, and when I say American culture, I'm not talking about what we have necessarily established about American culture, but the other side of American culture, of
like the
how they
popular,
have
are you saying the popular culture that
popular,
dominate?
or we'll just say European. Well, we will say we will just say the media, because because much of the media is really just propaganda anyway. So we'll just say the media in general, in a sense of like how, the media just plays in our faces. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, again, going into this concept of colorism and featureism, it they have ways of playing in our faces. You know, they're telling our women to go, and men too, to go and get plastic surgery. And that's become like the norm now, you know, with reality TV. Whenever you see a brown person on reality TV, they have a nose job, or the sister has a BBL and all that, as if they really need it, you know. So, or they're not wearing most of the time their real hair. You could do whatever you want to do with your hair, really, but you know, it has become a norm to see a brown woman on TV with blonde hair, you know. So it's that's just it, you know, and it's like those types of things don't have to be it, they don't need to be normalized amongst us. That's not to necessarily police a person's personal aesthetic of how they want to portray themselves, but it should not be the overall image of what represents us, you know. And colorism and featurism plays a really big part in it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like if you can't present your natural face and hair and skin to the world, then what are you presenting? And that's it.
Thank you. Tino Fury, I see you have your hand raised, so I'll let you go next.
Yeah, so how I combated colorism and featurism by research, showing first-hand primary sources, um, ancestral artifacts. Like anyone who's familiar with my page, I've shown ancestral artifacts that clearly show the what we call the Negro phenotype. Um, that's one of the biggest ways I've come back in that way, so that hey, look, anyone might want to argue with first-hand accounts, but they can't argue with these artifacts. They can't argue with this phenotype that was made in stone, you know, even though some people still argue about it. But I think artifacts, like ancestral artifacts that show without a shadow of doubt who the original people of the land is, stuff that no one can say is fake or made up, you know? So that's my way of combating it, colorism and futurism.
Thank you. Penny?
Yes, it goes back to what the brother just said. I mean, you know, the Olmec heads in Mexico. These are some of the things that were brought out in the book written by Ivan Van Sertima, who wrote "They Came Before Columbus." You know, there are so many things, and then there's a saying: "Stolen people on stolen land." You know, there are all of these um, parts of history that you know we continually need to connect. So people, whoever has the heart and the ears to open their channels and their minds to hear and to see, you know, will understand exactly what's going on. You know, we're dealing with this Western construct, right? Um, we're bombarded with social media, with television, and all the fake stuff that's going on, and it's through, I guess, the eyes and the minds of those who feel that they need to control everything. And so it is up to us in this day and this time, the times we're living in right now, with all of the um, confusion, because it is one big ball of confusion. What we have to do is step through the fire and, you know, open those channels. It's a spiritual, I look at it as a spiritual war. And as we are having these discussions about colorism, and which are all important, but sometimes I feel like we're missing the essence of life, regardless of what other people are saying or doing. That seems to be the opposite of where we're trying to go. We have to really understand, you know, keeping our eye on the prize, and that is to live um, a life with meaning, understanding our ancestors, talking with them, speaking to them, and hearing them, their messages, you know, which are clear, and that is to stand strong in who we are as individuals, and to, you know, keep that fire within our souls, our spirits, keep that light going, so we can get to a place in life where we, you know, we can find some semblance of peace, during these times. And I don't know what else to say, but sometimes I feel like we're missing the essence of life. The land that we walk on, this beautiful earth that it's being destroyed in different ways. Our energies have to go back to where our ancestors who were trying to hold on to the true meaning of life, even though they had to fight, but getting back to the natural, um, what the God, the Great Spirit has given us. That's what we have to put in front of us so we can, continue to walk this journey of life that we're all on. And so as we look at and understand colonization and colonialism and the impact that it's having on us, it's like you got to cut through that crap and then get to the essence, which is what these discussions are all about. As we flesh this stuff out, then we have to put something back that's meaningful that we can pass down and share with other people, because it is really about what is our life, what are our lives all about? Where is our passion, and how do we put the things that are necessary? How do we put these things together so we can be beacons of light and to help others along the way on this road of life that we're on. And I have to say that I really appreciate and feeling it in my spirit the discussions that we're having tonight, and I feel like it's really, I don't want to say a good start, because this has been this is a continuation and it didn't just start, but it's gonna kind of splay out and help other people. That's what I'm feeling right now. That's the energy that I'm feeling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Penny. Did anyone else want to share anything on this point, or can we go to the next? We're at our last point. Okay, I'll go to the next one. In regards to reclaiming our Indigenous identity, for those who have been misclassified or whose people were written out as being extinct, although we still are here. Because the issues such as colorism, featurism, and more have led to many of us being reclassified, and many of our ancestors and even us today living in fear of identifying with our Indigenous lineage, how would you recommend reclaiming Indigenous identity to those who do not identify but do have the lineage? Rebecca.
Okay, I was on mute. I truly believe that we need to continue to stand on truth about who we are. Follow our genealogy to discover where our people come from, and to also help the community to do the same. And I truly feel like this is a spiritual awakening within our people, because I said in 2007, years ago, that a shift was coming, because I felt it. And as it was coming, I saw what it was and realized, hey, this isn't a physical thing. This is all spiritual. Our ancestors are speaking to us because they want us to stand up for who we are. And I believe that once we do that, I believe that that will combat all of the narratives that were put out about our indigenous backgrounds and who we are and where we come from.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to answer that? All right. Well, I'm bringing this talk to a close. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you for sharing your stories, for just sparing your heart and letting us know the many experiences that you have. And it shows me, that I'm not alone. And I definitely believe it will show others out there when we put this out that they're not alone as well. And that there are people here that are doing the work. We understand how difficult it is, but our whole goal with the American Indian Traditional Healing Center is to work through the issues so that we can get back to the root, as you stated, Penny, which is our connection with the earth and returning and holding the earth as sacred and reconnecting to who we are. So thank you all and have a great night.